Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for December's edition of Librarians Recommend, where your favorite Hudson librarians are going to give their book recommendations for this month's topic. And since we're so close to the end of the year, we are going to talk about the best book we read in 2020. Some of us have chosen books that came out in 2020, and for others, it's just the favorite whatever book that we ended up reading this year. As always, please leave any comments you have in the comments section below. Let us know what your favorite book was that you read in 2020 as well, and let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future. And it sounded like I was up first to talk about my best book of 2020. And I had to choose a book by one of my very favorite authors. His name is Peter Swanson. He writes kind of mystery, noir, psychological fiction, thrillers. That's a lot of things, but he is just an incredible writer. I think he is just one of the most interesting writers out there today. And there's a few reasons I'm just crazy about him. Most of his books are set in the New England area, and I lived in New Hampshire for about a year. So reading about Boston or Maine just really makes me happy. It's just a fun area to set your books in. He also, in every single book he writes, you end up finishing the book with a book list to read next. He clearly is a huge fan of Agatha Christie and just a huge reader. So all of his characters are always reading and recommending books throughout the book. The book I chose is called 8 Perfect Murders. And I think that this is one of the best books he's ever done. It takes all of his best qualities and my favorite things about his book, and it's amplified. The premise for the book is that we have a bookstore owner. And when he was new to his profession, he would write a book blog. And one of the blogs he wrote was called 8 Perfect Murders. So it was a list of different books with kind of his idea of the perfect crime. Now, in present day, of course, there is a criminal working off of his book list, the blog post that he wrote. So he is working with an FBI agent to sort of take him from being a suspect to finding out who would have found this book list and kind of solve the crime. The other thing I'll say about Peter Swanson is that with that element of noir, right and wrong and good and bad can become very blurry in his books. He has the most fascinating, complex characters. And even if you don't like them, you may still find something about them that you can relate to in some weird way. He is just a student of human nature. And even though it's not always pretty, it is always fascinating. So please, for your 2020 favorite book list, put on your list 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. And I'm going to pick Joseph to go next.
Right. So my pick is kind of a favorite of mine that I listened to on audiobook for the first time. It is The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss, who is a sort of local author. He's from central Wisconsin, so get a little bit of hometown pride-ish in there. Now, this is kind of a side story to his main series. Specifically, it takes place within time frame, I think, of his first book, The Name of the Wind. It's just about one of the intriguing side characters you meet in that book named Ari, and kind of her strange world that she lives in, separate from everyone else. It is a fantasy story, but that's kind of irrelevant. It's just kind of there. You don't really think about it over much because this story is kind of abstract. It's all about the language and the pacing and the tone and the mood of it, which normally I'm not a big fan of in books. I just kind of tune out after a while most of the time. But this book is absolutely stunning. The language, if you can get into the rhythm of it and you get a feel for the pacing, the tone, everything. It is absolutely mesmerizing. It is gorgeous, and it's kind of got that like Dr. Seuss quality where like the language in and of itself, even if it's nonsense, you don't understand what's happening. Like you're just totally engrossed in what's happening just because the sound of the words flow so beautifully. And like I said, I listened to the audiobook version of it earlier this year, and it is read by the author himself. And if you have never heard Patrick Rothfuss speak, he has an incredible sonorous baritone. So you're hearing the author who has this incredible understanding of this text specifically and language generally, reading this story to you with an incredible, mesmerizing voice. I highly recommend it, even if you have no interest in his other writing or fantasy generally. It's really not important. This is a very disconnected thing that just kind of happens to fall into those slots by coincidence. The language and the pacing of this book is absolutely wonderful, and I highly recommend checking it out if you just want something soothing and pleasant to the ear. Okay, Shelley.
Hey, my book is 20 years old, but I read it this year and I loved it so much that I decided to choose it. It's The House of Sand and Fog by Andre Dubois III, if I'm saying his name right. And it's one of these, like, it just simmers before it boils. And the simmer is long, but it is satisfying and worth the wait. It's a book with no hero but also no villain, really. It's people with good intentions trying to do the best in the mess that they're in. And the main character, a woman named Kathy, her life has been a train wreck, but the one thing that's working for her is she just inherited her dad's small house in Southern California. And turns out she hasn't been paying the taxes on the house. So the county takes it from her and sells it at auction. The person who buys it is an Iranian colonel who came to the US after the Shah was overthrown. And he had a really good life in Iran. He was part of the Shah's collection of bad people and money, status, power, and that's gone here in America. But he works really hard to maintain his image, his family's image, that they're still very successful, that he has a great career, a nice place, and they're a great family. And it's a big lie. But he needs to maintain this image until his daughter gets married, because otherwise she's not going to get a good Iranian husband. So he decides to buy this house, that it could be a really good investment for the very last of their dwindling savings, and that maybe he will develop a real estate career. So he buys it, Kathy's evicted, and the police officer who has to throw her out feels really sorry for her, and they stay connected, and he tries to help her regain the property, and he falls in love with her. So these forces of nature come together. The colonel, who's stubborn and will not bend, even though he knows this was very unfair to the woman. And the reason it was unfair is the county never warned her about the property tax delinquency, and then they screwed up the processing of the whole process. So she's victimized in some way by the system. Kathy will not get her hands around the fact that he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't know any of this. He just bought the house. And the cop wants to fix it for her. And they all intertwine and things go very bad. It is literary fiction, but it almost reads like a suspense novel, not quite a thriller, but along those lines, because you just feel in the whole book, the tension, just hangs like humidity. And so the pacing is rather slow, like a lot of literary fiction can be, but it's engaging enough to keep you there. And the characters are so flawed, but they have these just moments of humanity and vulnerability that you really relate to. And it keeps you in the story, but also you just aren't sure who you should root for, who's got the best case. So that's my choice. I highly recommend it, and it was made into a movie, and I'm going to hopefully watch that over our little break here that we're going to have for Christmas. So, Chris, I guess this means you are last but never least.
Thank you. Well, and to tie into yours, I did see the movie. It's Ben Kingsley. It's a very good movie. So
Great.
I'm on the other end. I've seen the movie, but I've not read the book. So you're making me want to get the book now. So yes. And since Sarah's not here, I might be stepping on Sarah's scene a little bit, because this might be considered a kid's book. And I say might, I'll kind of explain that in a bit, but this is by John Rocco. It's How We Got to the Moon. I'm trying to get all the cover in there so you can see his amazing art. He is well known for doing the art for the Percy Jackson series of books. So you might recognize his artwork in the book from that. And he used to work at Disney Imagineering. So he's got quite the background in drawing. And I just love, I'll show a couple here on just the artwork in the book. This is the inside, trying to not get glare there, but I really like that he stresses the people, the workforce, the 400,000 people across the country that were kind of required to put the Apollo program for going to the moon together. And I get a lot of kids that ask for book recommendations after I've given a presentation. And there's a million titles out there that you can recommend, but this is the most comprehensive book, I think, for every aspect of the program. It's even got a great one on how a slide rule works, which is really great because we didn't have computers back then. So all the engineers that were designing the rockets and working out the trajectories, you had to use what was called a slide rule. And I actually have a slide rule, and I'll demonstrate that when I do a presentation, but it's great to actually have an explanation of that in the book so the kids can kind of wrap their head around how primitive the technology was at the time and how all this was kind of figured out with pencil and paper and a slide rule and doing that. So I also like that it kind of covers multiple generations, because I could also recommend the book as easily for adults. It's got this amazing artwork, which I think kind of couches it as maybe being a children's book, but it goes into, again, a lot of great detail on almost every aspect of the program, but it's written in layman's terms. So it's easy to read. It doesn't get very technical, but it gets into every aspect of the program. More than even a kid may want, kind of on that detail, but I think there's enough interesting artwork to keep them engaged. So I think it's one of those rare books that kind of straddles generations, where you could say adults would just as easily want to pick this up as maybe older elementary students and going up through there. So I love that. And then kind of paying tribute to what 2020 has been about. This book did not have a normal rollout for John with COVID-19. He couldn't do the normal book tour. But he did these amazing, which I printed out some of the sheets for. He did some Zoom interviews where he kind of, with either local bookstores kind of sponsoring it, but if you can see the images in there, he used some of the people that consulted with him on the book, in this case, a few of the female engineers. And so he had them on Zoom interviews and kind of promoted the book that way. And then I reached out to John through Facebook. We became friends through that. And then I told him how much I was impressed by his book and that I'd like to use it for my own presentations in classrooms. And he put me in touch with some of the people that he did the rollout with. And so they've been kind enough to kind of send me little autograph plates that I can put in the book. So I've kind of got a collection of a lot of the people that he consulted with for the book that are of that Apollo generation, which unfortunately we're kind of losing more of those people every year because we just had the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. And so if you kind of do the math, you know, those people are all about, 75, 80, 85 years old, depending on how old they were when they started working on the program. And so we're losing some of the astronauts and the engineers. And it's been kind of a side project of me to kind of get those interviews and meet some of those people to get their stories, to kind of be able to share those experiences kind of firsthand with the people that I'm giving presentations to. So it's just a wonderful book. It came out in a really challenging year, but I think the book's doing really well. I see that it's on a lot of year-end short lists for awards, and I'm hoping John does really well with that. But just really impressed that he, I think there's got to be over 500 illustrations he did in the book. He just goes through every detail on it. So real labor of love from him, and we're just really impressed with it. So that was my pick for the best of the year.
Fantastic. So what are we doing in January? Does anybody remember? No, I don't either.
I don't know.
Absolutely no idea.
It'll be a big surprise. It's the cliffhanger ending.
Come back next year.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Happy reading, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.